Okay, so we're going to be doing our watercolor skill builder today. And this first box says wet on dry. So with watercolor paints, these are watercolor paints, you need to get them wet to wake them up. Right now they're dry, like I can rub my finger over them, nothing's going to happen because they aren't activated until you use water, hence the name watercolor. So wet on dry means you're going to put wet paint onto dry paper. Okay, now I need the paint to be wet, so I dip my brush in some water, pick up a color, and simply paint in this box. Okay, so that is wet on dry, so that's just your basic painting. Alright, now we're going to do wet on wet, so I'm going to rinse my brush. Wet on wet is different than wet on dry. So what we do is we're going to take wet paint, put it on wet paper. So I get my brush wet, clean it, make sure it's clean. I wet my paper. Then I get my color and I put it onto the wet paper, and you should see it kind of spread. It provides a little bit of movement, a little bit of softness to it. Usually with wet on wet, I really like to put in two different colors and watch them kind of just move into each other, and I just kind of dab it in like that. If you're doing a big area, you would paint a little more, but since this area is so small, I'm kind of just putting little dots and watching them spread about. Do not use so much water that you develop giant puddles. So I'm kind of getting that here. So you can see this little streak here, that's actually a puddle. We don't want that, that's a little too wet. So you got to find that happy medium in between, okay? So I'm not going to really touch, I'm just going to let it dry. But if yours is really, really puddly, go get a paper towel and just dab some of that up, and it will absorb. Alright, next, moving on, this is a graded wash. So what that means, you're going to go light to dark or dark to light, showing value, darks and lights. So, pick your color, and you want to have as little water on the brush as possible. And I'm going to start here at the bottom. When I have just a little bit of water on the brush, my color is going to appear more saturated, and that means essentially brighter or darker, however you want to look at it. Okay, now I'm going to dip my brush into my water, and I'm going to just rinse off some of that color. The more water that is on your brush and the less paint, the lighter the paint becomes. Makes sense. So I go up a little bit more, rinse a little more. You should notice this blue is gradually getting lighter and lighter and lighter until the end it should just be nothing. So that's called a graded wash. That's how you can transition from darks to lights. Now if yours is just a little too choppy, like this kind of line right here is a little too choppy, I want it to be a little softer, I can just go back in and kind of layer in some strokes, just really softly. You don't want to go too crazy. Just make it look nice and pretty. This is great for oceans, great for skies, anything you want to show darks and lights with. Okay. Next we have this called a resist. Super fun. I love resist. Get oil pastels out and just draw whatever. You can draw a picture, you can just make some patterns. I'm just going to make some patterns here. Then pick your color, paint on top. You should notice nothing is happening to that oil pastel. It's because oil pastel is made with oils. Watercolor is activated by water. Water and oil don't mix. They avoid each other. It's like they don't like each other. So when you put the water on top of the oil, nothing happens. They're avoiding each other. What that does, because they don't like each other, creates some really beautiful artwork. So this is always fun, like if you want to draw a picture of something, you can draw it with oil pastel and then color in the whole thing with paints, and you will not lose your beautiful lines there. That is resist. You can do that with oil pastel or crayons. Crayons work as well. Oil pastel just gives you a little more brightness to it. All right, next is salt. So just go ahead and do wet on dry. Paint just solid color. And with this, you want it to be a little bit wet, not too dry. So I'm going to get a little more water on my brush there. And then quickly put some salt on it. What happens is the salt will absorb some of that water, and it will leave these really cool speckly marks once it's dry. You're not going to see it really right now. So we'll check on that once it dries. Okay. Dripping. So dripping is fun. Dripping, it's kind of like you kind of got to play around with it. So you want to pick your color, and it's going to have a little bit of wetness to it. So again, you got to play around with how much water you're using. And then you can tilt your paper and watch it drip. Okay, and so if you had a big piece of paper, you can do a lot at the top and have it all kind of drip down. Super fun. Adds really cool effect, especially if you have colors that kind of go into one another. So that's dripping. Next, this is very simple. Basic stuff. You just want to make some lines. So I want you to use the tip of your brush this time. And this is good technique for those tiny small details that you're going to have to get in. Now, when you work small with watercolor, you have to use the tip of your brush, and you have to make sure you don't use too much water. If there's too much water on your brush, it's just going to bleed into or go out of the lines that you want it to be in. So just a little bit of paint, a little bit of water, tip of your brush. Those are how to get into delicate little spots, make tiny marks. All right, and then we have splatter. Please be careful with this. So you want a wet brush, get some wet paint, and you want to kind of hold the brush and then you tap it. And you can create dots. And see, it's unpredictable. You never know where these dots will go. So just be aware of that if you are going to do splatter paint. So I got a little bit of that color up here into my salt, but it's a good example to show you what can happen. So these are your basic watercolor skill builders in the painting studio.